Mob Daughter by Karen Gravano Chapter 3. See, you learn something new every day. Gerard and I were the other accomplishments that I was proud of. I still remember when Gerard was born. I was 3 years old, and I was completely grossed out that he was a boy. I wanted a sister, a little doll that I could dress up. I was jealous of him the moment he came home from the hospital. I had been the first and only child, and not only that, I was the very first grandchild on my mother's side. Me too. Now Gerard was getting most of the attention. From the moment he was born, he was the apple of my mother's eye. Gerard was her little man. It was probably fair because the minute I had been born, I had been the apple of my father's eye. Looking back, I can say that I am so much like our father, and Gerard is so much like our mother. Both Mom and Gerard are quiet, non-confrontational, and kind-hearted. Dad and I, on the other hand, are hot-headed, stubborn, loyal, and loving. My first introduction to my father's not-so-normal life happened around the time Gerard arrived. I was in kindergarten, and the kids in our class were asked to sell candy door to door to raise money for a class trip. There were incentive prizes for the good salespeople, and I had my eye on the popcorn maker. The machine was one of the bigger prizes, so I knew I had my work cut out for me. Once the teacher handed out our fundraising packets, I wanted to get started right away, making the neighbors commit to buying from me before somebody else in the class got to them. Unfortunately, the weather did not cooperate, and it was raining too hard after school to get out. My father told me not to worry about it, that he would buy all the candy required for me to earn my popcorn maker. I didn't think that was the way it was supposed to be done. As far as I knew, the rules were that I had to sell the stuff door to door, and I didn't want to cheat and get in trouble. Dad made a deal with me. He said he would take the candy to the after-hours club he owned and sell it to all the guys who worked there. That way I would still be selling my goods to a lot of different people, even though technically I wouldn't be going to houses in the neighborhood. I liked the plan, and we closed the agreement with a handshake. My mom used to do that to me. I'll buy all the candy. F going to the neighborhood. Fuck that. The next morning when I woke up, my collection envelope was busting with cash. The sheet where I was supposed to register the names of my buyers was filled with odd names like Sally Dogs and Big Louie. And none of the names was followed by an address as they were on my classmates' sheets. But there was no question I had sold enough candy to get the popcorn maker. I was looking at stacks of money, hundreds of dollars. I proudly took the order form and the money to my teacher. She was not impressed with my success. She promptly called my mother to school to discuss the situation. She was sure I had made up the list and taken the money from somebody in the house to win the prize. Despite my pleas that the list was honest, I knew my father would never have steered me wrong. When my mother arrived at school, she assured my teacher that all my customers were real people and I had worked hard for the cause. I got my popcorn maker with enough points left over to win a few more things. I settled for just a popcorn maker so I didn't have to feel too greedy. That was the only prize I really wanted anyway. I really liked living in Brooklyn. We had so many relatives living nearby, and Gerard and I were always busy and indulged. We'd go to the playground in Gravesend Park for hours and hours to play on the swings or bounce on the big plastic animals on springs. On a good day, we'd get an Italian ice when the good humor man came around. I remember a particular Sunday trip to the duck pond. My father and mother took my older cousins and us to feed the ducks. We each had 2 slices of stale bread we could rip apart and toss at our leisure. My cousin Mary held to her crust too long, and a duck bit her finger. My father chased it down the path and caught it before it could escape into the water. What happened next left us all traumatized. The duck was squawking, the kids were screaming, and the feathers were flying as Dad snapped the bird's neck. Ah! It was a nightmare. Oh, man. But that was my father's instinct to protect the people he loved. He felt compelled to protect us, even if he sometimes went well beyond the accepted bounds. My mother was very nurturing. If I had a question, she always had a way of answering me without answering me. They were never satisfactory answers, and I had to fill in the parts she didn't tell me. I was probably wrong most of the time, but I couldn't keep pestering her. She was very down to earth and simple. She preferred cooking a meal at home to going out to restaurants. That's how my mom is. She knew how to make dinner work with very small means and how to improvise. My mama too. We didn't know when we was poor. Even when we were broke, it always seemed like we had plenty of food. She could make a meal out of macaroni ricotta 5 different ways by adding peas or cutting up pieces of chicken. Oven hot garlic bread was the touch I loved the most. At our house, we had a family dinner routine. The table was set in a nook, and my dad always sat at the head. I sat to his right, Gerard sat on the bench across from me, and Mom sat at the other end. Every night, Dad had us go around the table, sharing something new we had discovered in the last 24 hours. When we were done, he would say, "See, you learn something new every day." He was proud that there was always something. My mother was a woman of very few words. If anything was wrong, especially with my father, she always made sure that my brother and I never learned about it. She shielded us with the same protective instinct as he did, but she just delivered it in a more understated style. She was the kind of mother who would create fake report cards so we didn't get in trouble with my father. She was so quiet I always assumed she was weak and submissive, but not in a bad way, more like a dutiful way. Not asking questions was not a feeble shortcoming. It was respected that family members didn't gain anything by prying all the time. I never realized how much strength there was in her silence until I was much older. My father was the big jokester in the family. He was always playfully teasing my mother, and she was so amiable about being on the receiving end. You could tell that she loved him to death. It didn't seem to bother her that Dad was out all night. If he was out late, I'd always sleep in his spot in the bed until he came home. He would pick me up and move me into my bedroom, whatever hour it was. Mom and he never seemed to have any fights about where he was, and she always appeared to be very understanding about his unconventional work schedule. I wouldn't say they were over the top super affectionate, but when Dad came home and lay on the couch, he would put his head on Mom's lap and she would stroke his hair. Lots of times I wanted to ask my mother questions about what Dad really did for a living, but I knew she wouldn't answer them. She was the family ostrich. She'd just bury her head when things arose that she didn't want to deal with. She routinely spent hours obsessively cleaning the house, going from room to room to room, and then starting again. If we were making footprints on a carpet, she would walk behind us, vacuum in hand, erasing any evidence that we had been there. Sometimes my dad would have a group of guys over to the house on a Sunday morning. They'd bring in bagels and shoot the shit. Without considering it intrusive, my mother would be right behind them with her vacuum, oh God, pushing it under their feet even as they talked. Why couldn't she wait until they left the house before she started cleaning? Perhaps it was her way of vacuuming up his shifty friends and his tawdry life. Alright, y'all, that was the end of chapter 3. I'll be back with chapter 4.